All right, London Calling. I've had a pretty long-standing relationship with this album. I first heard this album when I was in my second year of college, so about 2005 or 2004, 2005, roughly. And really, this album had a pretty big impact on me, especially as a younger person. Mostly because up to that point, I was really mostly listening to a lot of early '90s grunge rock, stuff that I really love, but by comparison, kind of angry or brooding. And comparatively speaking, the last two Clash albums are understandably pretty visceral and angry by comparison to London Calling. Not to say London Calling doesn't have its moments of intensity or anger; it does. But as you really listen to this album, especially as it progresses from the first song to the last, you notice a real shift in mood. It starts out very apocalyptic. London Calling is kind of this very post-apocalyptic, wasteland of 1970s London, where all these people were struggling through a pretty deep recession and Thatcherism, and pretty much things were not so great for people in England at the time, especially if you were a young musician. But what came out of that in this period was a lot of great music, a lot of punk music, new wave, and really a lot of melting pot kind of influence. Like you had a lot of people and culture from different areas of the British Empire coming to England, especially from Jamaica, and they were influencing the music that was becoming popular there. I think nowhere is it more obvious and prevalent on this album. There's a lot of reggae music, a lot of ska, a lot of there's some rockabilly, some other influences, but mostly it's a kind of a combination of rock, a little bit of punk, and a lot of reggae and ska. So, moving on to brand new catalog, you've got a real kind of rockabilly influence, and that goes back to Joe Strummer's first band, the 101ers. So that's kind of a callback to that period of his life, and there's sort of a ironic kind of attachment to capitalist excess. If you really want to dig deeper than you really should with that song, it's a good song, but it's a pretty simple, straightforward rockabilly rock song. Jimmy Jazz, I think it was a pretty big left turn for the Clash. It's a very kind of playful and fun song about a Jamaican guy getting murdered. It's a pretty, I wouldn't say it's a bleak song, but it's very reflective of what life in Jamaica can be like for some people, even today. Moving on to Hateful, which is a song I've kind of a weird history with, but it's a fun little Bo Diddley kind of tune about lampooning drug addicts, which I think if you kind of juxtapose it with the song before and after it, it's kind of, there's a lot of underlying social commentary in the Clash's music, and I think given that this is about drug addiction, you've got basically you have songs that take place in a country where they probably manufacture and distribute drugs, and then you have the end result of that in America. And then going back to Rudy Can't Fail, you're sort of, lionizing or basically creating this heroic and positive image of a sort of third world or Jamaican, which otherwise known as a rude boy. So moving on to the second section of this album, Spanish Bombs, moving over to Europe and kind of the history of Spain after the Spanish Civil War and kind of the fallout of fascism, which, if you know your history about Joe Strummer and this band, you know that there's a lot of anti-fascist kind of themes in their music. When Joe was a small child, his older brother kind of became a neo-Nazi for a while and ended up, unfortunately, dying as a result. So I think that had a big influence on Strummer kind of railing against that kind of mentality of the rest of his life. And I think no more is it relevant really today. So moving on to the right profile, this is sort of a song talking to or speaking to the kind of suppression of people and how it's kind of unreasonable, unfair to push people down who are really trying to make their lives better. And moving on, oddly enough, to Lost in the Supermarket, which is this kind of poppy meditation on the ups and downs of being a consumer in capitalist culture. And then moving on to Clam Down, which is one of my favorite songs in this album. That's probably one of the most clever songs they've wrote. And it kind of can work on a lot of different levels. The Clam Down is basically talking about fascism and different points of view. Like, basically, the narrator of the song is sarcastically kind of playing out the role of, being a right-wing Thatcher or fascist at the time. But it also could kind of be interpreted as a call to arms for people who fight against this mentality. So it's a lot of ambiguity, but this is a pretty good song. But I think at the end of the day, it's pretty obvious what they're trying to say about it. Then you go to Guns of Brixton, which is, kind of another kind of rebellious, song. Like, basically, it's going to be you or somebody else at the end of the day if, somebody's coming after you, so you might as well go out shooting. And this is one of Paul Simonon's few, song tracks. It's probably the best one he's ever done. The song was never particularly good live, but, on record, it's pretty good. The Rangam Boyo this is where the album sort of shifts more into the kind of the fun and playful direction. There's still some pretty obvious social commentary in these songs, but you can see an obvious shift to kind of a more party, playful attitude. And I think one of the strengths of this album in the context when it was put out and made is, there was a lot of heavy metal, a lot of Black Sabbath, a lot of brooding, dark music being put out, and this is sort of the Clash saying, we can get a message across to people, but let's have fun with it. And given that they had lost their manager before this album, they were kind of free to do whatever they wanted to. And I think that they went in probably the most surprising direction imaginable. But to this day, it's their strongest statement, hands down. So then you get into Death or Glory, which I think is some of the funniest lyrics that they've ever written. But I'll let you listen to the song to really get what I'm saying there. But again, this is kind of similar to Guns of Brixton, where, and I think one of the things that really struck to me about this band and their lyrics is that, they were all about empowering people in some way or another. They wanted people to have a sort of idealistic and positive attitude about how their role in the world. And I think no more obvious, anywhere else than where it shows up here. Anyway, but at the same time, it's sort of saying, like, don't get too big about yourself. Because, at the end of the day, you're going to be brought back down to earth. So Coca-Cola is a real fun, quick, very punky kind of tune. Much like Hateful, it's a parody of the ridiculousness of drug addiction. And I think, given the long storied history of rock stars kind of idealizing drug culture, these songs are really pretty strong and clever. So then moving on to Card Cheat, which is probably one of the better songs that Mick Jones has ever sang in the band. And his role in songwriting has always been kind of a standout in the sense that he kind of feels like he's telling his own story. But I think that's what makes the band great is not everything is told from Joe's perspective or voice. But there's no specific commentary in the song, but it still feels like it has some place in the album in terms of telling a real world story about somebody. But it's a little more generalized. Now, so you get to the fourth part of this album with "Lovers Rock," which is a really, really good song, and it's almost kind of antithetical for this band to write because they never wrote love songs. They never wrote songs about sex or drugs or rock and roll. But here they are writing a song about sex, more or less, but a really fun and catchy one. So moving on to Four Horsemen, again, this is sort of like almost a more fun mirror of London Calling, but it's sort of this like, fun and playful take on like the end of the world. So then you get to I'm Not Down. Again, this is a sort of empowering and positive song, moving in the direction that the album goes, where they go from being kind of like downtrodden and apocalyptic to positive and fun and happy. Given the subject matter of a lot of these songs, it's a very interesting and idealistic kind of point of view they're taking. And one of my other favorite songs on here is Revolution Rock. Real fun, laid back reggae tune. And I think to this day it's one of my favorite songs of theirs. Some of the lyrics get a little fun and goofy and silly, but who cares at this point? It's a pretty fun ride. Then you get to Train in Vain, which is not my favorite song on the album, but it's definitely one of the more popular songs in the band's catalog and one that probably got them on pop radio a lot. And much like Lovers Rock, it just feels kind of like a weird outlier. But, it's basically just, Mick Jones talking about a breakup he had with his girlfriend. Which is a very odd note to end this album on, but I feel like if there's anything change I would have made is maybe have I guess maybe the way that they sequences things made sense to them at the time, but it feels like Revolution Rock would have been a more sensible way to end this record. And I'm not sure, maybe you could have put I think you probably could have put a Train in Vain like right after Lovers Rock. But anyway, that's my review of London Calling by The Clash. Hope you enjoyed, and thanks for listening.